Hey everyone. So I have spent a lot of the weekend just watching Christian Kulamagi live streams, and I wanted to talk about something that Christian almost never talks about, but he does all the time. So I'm going to show you in this live stream something Christian does, and I think it's fascinating because on this day, November 26th, 2019, Christian sees what is a perfect setup and he decides to pass on it. So I'm going to show you the context. I'm going to force you to watch a bit of the video, and we're going to go through everything,
Tomorrow
and
will potentially be a very, very busy day.
I'll let you hear his voice, but I'll skip through it a bit. So
Yeah.
market opens, and I want to show you. I got to show you. You have to understand the context. So I'm going to show you IWM on this day. You're going to see the Nasdaq on this day, and you're going to understand exactly why this is so incredible. So we're in 2019 November, and this is what IWM looked like the day before yesterday. Okay, and this is what IWM is doing at the open today. It's essentially opening sideways, not making any big moves or anything like that. But on this day, the day before today, IWM gapped out of a tight range and went straight up. And if we look at NASDAQ on the same day, November November 25, 2019, this is what the NASDAQ did. So both NASDAQ and IWM had like a momentum burst, and they conceivably broke out on this day here. This is when a market potentially started to move. So I want you to have a look at like Christian's watch list, and I really want you to pay attention to some like F cell here. So we're opening higher.
CXI.
Okay. And importantly, Christian doesn't mention this in his live stream, but look at his watch list in terms of green and red. So I'm trying to talk about the situational awareness and like why you would choose to pass on a setup here. Half his watch list is red. Half of his positions are red here, and half of his watch list is red here. And when he gets to F cell, this is the first stock that I think looks, or sorry, BE. This is the first stock I think looks incredible. So these are all good setups. He's going to have a look at BE. All right, now look at this. This is a perfect flag. Every single person would agree this is a very good breakout here. Look at the volume buzz. It's got a predicted relative volume of 6 at this point in time. It's up 6%, so you could totally buy it as a breakout here. And if you were to like ask me like how far could it go, very easily I could see it hitting 750 if this were a good breakout. Like very easily, right? Like its prior moves were 375 to 5, right? 550 to 7. It could totally easily do $1 here, which would make a really profitable trade. Um, but Christian, look, it's not in his positions at the moment. You would see it highlighted if it was. His most recent highlighted stock is CCXI. And
BE strong.
he literally just says BE strong. And if you watch him for the rest of the stream, he ends up taking absolutely no positions in this thing.
CCXI is holding below V.
Now, if you go onto Christian's website and if you've watched him trade for any amount of time, you know that his stated method is to buy high tide flags, like stocks that have made a big move, are going sideways or they've pulled back, and you buy them on the breakout day with the 5 minute or the 1 minute opening range highs. Now, or maybe 30 minute if you really aren't comfortable. But you can see we're 5 minutes into the open. If you were following his method, which I've done, you would have taken F cell there because it's literally a perfect setup. Now, I can show you exactly what happened with F cell, and it's really relevant because when you see or sorry, BE. When you see like a perfect setup that doesn't work, you really want to figure out why. And so here we are. This is it on the day that the market went, November 25th. This is it on the day Christian decided to pass. The breakout failed. So you have to understand the predicted R vol was 6 times the volume buzz was 600%. So in the open, based on the first 5 minutes, you would have expected like volume to be up here based on how it looked. And it was up, 6.5, and it immediately failed. Well, Christian knew to pass on it, and he's never talked about why. And I just wanted to highlight this is like the biggest thing ever, right? We know going into markets that yesterday was like a perfect breakout on IWM on this day, on November 25th. TradingView is horrible to navigate, but we're talking about this breakout here. This was a very good day to go long. And if you think about it, maybe you could have chased stuff here. But what happened here was half of his watch list was red, half of his watch list was green. And if you just had flipped through the ETFs, NASDAQ didn't look great. This is what NASDAQ looked like on day 2. Like very small day, not really doing anything. Half of his watch list wasn't doing much, and same thing with IWM. So just watching 2 ETFs, you could have figured out that the market wasn't really high probability breakout day, as opposed to on this day, both NASDAQ and IWM gapped above the prior day's high, like immediately. And I wanted to just mention that because going into today's video, I want to talk about the recent events where IWM and NASDAQ look like this. So I went on to my TC2000 and I found here, I wrote down, these are all the days where NASDAQ and IWM broke out, like ostensibly on the same day. So on April 13th, I wrote down that both NASDAQ and IWM broke out. And then also, I felt like on April 22nd, NASDAQ broke out. And then on April 30th, both NASDAQ and IWM broke out. So I'll show you. This is what like the market looked like at the time. And basically I said like a big green day was a breakout. So this day here is April 13th. And if we look at IWM, that's what it looks like. So like very clearly breaking out. And then I said that this day here, I mean, to me, it looks okay, right? Tight range, gap up. And then on NASDAQ's extended. So I said it looked good on IWM, but I don't think it looks good on, or it did look good on the 17th. It looked very good on IWM, but it didn't look good on NASDAQ. And so we want to study like both days, for example, because I don't think it makes sense to long tech stocks when they're up 7 days in a row almost. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Or would you rather like be doing IWM type stuff? Probably IWM type stuff. And even if IWM fails on a day like this, you might have things that follow through. The point being is these 2 days offer really good EV first swings. And then when you get a reversal like this as well, April 30th, like that's a big green day on the NASDAQ, following like a tight range / pullback on the indices, right? This is the day the move starts. And so we really wanted to study, what I wanted to do is I wanted to study April 30th, April 17th, and April 13th. And so what I did on TC2000, it's a much better tool. You can sort things by like what moved the most on a specific day. So I have it started on April 13th. And this is what IWM, NASDAQ, SPY, RSP, Fangu, Soxol, right? So you couldn't have longed Soxol on this day. It doesn't make sense to do on the 13th. But very clearly, you get something in the small to mid caps, right? Or the more speculative stuff. So like Bitcoin, for example, probably pairs closer to, like, I don't think it's necessarily directly related to QQQ. I think it's more speculative than the NASDAQ is. And it's probably you'd want to trade Bitcoin, in my opinion, maybe off of like Tesla like a very speculative stock. I mean, Tesla's not speculative, but Tesla like 10 years ago was probably correlated to Bitcoin. But nowadays, I would say Bitcoin is correlated to something closer to IWM, basically. So when we see Bitcoin doing this, and then I see MSTR up here as like one of the top stocks on the 13th, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Do I have this set for the 13th? Yeah, I do. But here are the top stocks. So I just want to, this is what IWM looks like. And then we can look, obviously this is a day where the whole market is moving. We can look at the top stocks from this day. So this is how the swing started on MSTR. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the market obviously followed through, but this is how the move started on MSTR. This is how Oklo started. So again, this is coming from a bear flag, and Oklo obviously putting in a tight range and breaking out, and then a 4% breakout. And then here we have QBTS, exact same pattern, right? Rocket Lab. This doesn't look anywhere near as bad, but it did follow through a lot from, like, if you look at Rocket Lab, this is like a long-term momentum leader, right? That's kind of what it looks like here. And so the move did start on this day. If we look at Oklo, it's below the 200 and stuff like that. If we look at MSTR, it's going to be a similar context here where you have like a huge down move and then a bounce. This is where the bounce starts. And so this is like very important because this is the best performing stock coming out of IWM, entering what is essentially the start of a bull market for a bit, a bull move. It's not continuation setups that worked amazingly, except in Rocket Lab. So we can look at HIMS, which is the same context. Everything was bouncing here. Then we have Xerox, which I think looks a lot less compressed, but it did work very well on this day. And you can essentially see, like, on this day, buying a green candle off of a tight range had much higher EV than what you would expect. Here's QUBT, starts on the 13th and bounces. Now we want to see, like, this is move 1 of a bull market, right? This is how it starts. It didn't start here. I mean, there were clean moves here, but this is where Soxel started its move, right? Off of the right side of the V. So in a grand context, right? The first thing to bounce, we can look on the 31st. I can go to tools. We can see what worked for the 4 days here. But essentially the biggest moves I can tell you off of memory are things like AOI, which had news on this day, right? This is like a leading name. We also had things like Light coming out of this move here, Core, ASTS. And so essentially the things that bounced best here were kind of closely related to the tech theme that had sold off, essentially. So you see like Soxel straight down. If we look at IWM, it didn't sell off anywhere near as cleanly as Soxel did. And so coming out of this, like, this is very aggressive selling. Coming out of this bear market period, the best moves were essentially related to semiconductors. And then once you get to and this move lasted for a really long time. You can see BW, it was like things like Fastly, which had a specific episodic pivot were moving, but it wasn't much. It was basically all Soxel coming out of this period here. And so once the market had a secondary kind of thrust, you could have said this day as well, but let's see what NASDAQ looks like. Okay. Let's have a look at what worked best from April 8th. So step 1 is to trade the things that sold off the hardest. That's what bounced the best. Then if we go to tools, custom date sort, and I want to see, I think we could all agree that this is like a breadth thrust day on NASDAQ because it gaps up huge. IWM gaps up huge. And we would want to know what works best for the period here. And then the market resets pretty quick. So I want to know from this day to this day what works the best. Okay. So it's things like RXT, right? But that doesn't make much sense. Like, you could never, that's just a random move. things like LWLG, which I traded, and the move started uh, ostensibly a day before. It wasn't very clean. I just traded the breakout on the 10th, and then I sold it the next day. Then we had EOS, and this is where EOS starts. So we have IWM, right? EOS. So it's not very clear. Um, this is what I had in mind. So essentially, when the market bounced, the swings worked for 2 weeks. And that to me makes a lot of sense, like if you think about it. And it was the things that sold off really well. So on this day here, and this day here, if you just bought Soxel, for example, that was the best trade coming out of the bottom. And we can just go down the list and you'll see that pattern remains. So even though IWM gapped up on this day heavily, not a whole lot of things moved. Just quickly, NBIS had already started its move. BE, I guess, technically started. But a lot of the breakouts that happened on this day, there's not a whole lot of things that had like a really good swing setup on this day here. The move began on the right side of the V in the things that sold off the hardest. And that move lasted for literally 13 bars. And what you would have wanted to do, so I'm just talking about how to approach this bull market as effectively as possible. So you would have bought the thing that sold off the most. That was Soxel. Then on this day here, April 13th, you would have wanted to, after the bread thrust, if you think about it, it was things that bounced worked, things that failed to bounce, such as MSTR, then followed through the best, right? MSTR worked very well off of this tight range, and that's when it started its move. After that, that move also lasted a few days, but not as long as the first leg. So the first leg in Soxel literally was here to here. That's a 15 bar move, 3 weeks. If you had rotated your capital after the majority of the move into new trades such as MSTX, which started here when IWM looked good and QQQ looked good, the best breakouts that worked here were things like MSTX. So that move again does another 50%. If we look at my list of good days to trade again, we only have April 22nd for QQQ. The next period where I have both making good moves, like good breakouts, was April 30th. So if you had again held just MSTX until the 30th, it wouldn't have worked, which is important. But you would have wanted to, I think you could have gotten out on this day here, like the first kind of day it took out the prior day's low. That's a 63% trade. And then on the 30th, we have again things like IWM, things like NASDAQ making really big moves. And the question would be like, what worked best? Because at this point, the market's extended for the 3 to 5 days following this breakout in NASDAQ. So I'm going to do that again. We'll go tools, custom date sort. And we want to know from here to here what moved the most. Okay, we can go to here. Okay, and so again, look at this is where flags started to work the best, right? So it's not just flags, right? This is well into a bull market where IWM looks like this. IWM itself has put in a flag. This is leg one. This is the first pullback to the 20 in the environment. This is where flags work after a huge leg up. And IWM doesn't have to follow through crazy, but this is where things like DGXX put in a flag. And I don't know. To me, this looks crazy, but it works. It does 58% in this period. MU breaks out on the 1st. So this is 1 day after the 30th. And MUU does 40%, but you can see the follow through here. So this is much closer to a continuation breakout than, this is very good. But this is like, again, it's trying, and the whole market tried the day before. This is where markets are starting to like actually do well off of continuation breakouts. On this day here, RXT, this is a continuation breakout, right? This is the first time flags actually work well. If we look at SMCI, that just gapped higher. You couldn't have bought it. This is Wolf. So again, look, the breakout works on the 30th. And this isn't a perfect setup. It's just a tight range off the 20. And look at how well it follows through for the days after the market broke out. Then we have HUT, and it's going to look the exact same. I think it gaps up on this day on earnings, but you know, there you go. We have Koru. So again, this is a continuation setup, and look how well Koru does. 27. This you could have. It doesn't have earnings, right? So it doesn't matter. You could have held for 5 days. You could have gotten out here for 32%. And this again, clean move, pullback. The breakout works, and this is the day when continuation setups worked. So in the first leg of the market, this is so cool. Okay. On this day here, on the 31st, everything bounces. QQQ bounces, IWM bounces, and the stuff that bounces the best is the stuff that sold off the hardest a week before the bounce. Okay. So it's like Soxel falls 30% in 3 days. TNA does not. I mean, it kind of does. But it does 14%, right? So it's half as much as Soxel. Same thing with something like, you know, GDX doesn't fall, BITX 15%. These aren't huge declines. The things that are panic selling off are semis. Then semis bounce and the whole market changes. And the swing that works best is Soxel. Now the market hasn't pulled back yet, and we have another breadth day on the general market on this day. And the things that work best again are the things that have failed to bounce. So you see, it's like the bounce works. The things that have failed to really bounce work. That's the threshold. That's what happens there. And then, only then, once the market pulls back kind of a bit, like this isn't really a pullback, but only 4 weeks into the move, do things like this IWM has pulled back, right? We have Chad, which has kind of pulled back. ARKK has very pulled back. So once a legitimate pullback happens, do we get continuation setups working? And the continuation setups that worked looked like Koru, HUT had earnings. I think MU looked pretty reasonable here. It's not perfect, but that's what it was. I think Iron looked incredible. And I think the best one from all this group was NBIS. And this ultimately happened the day after the whole market bounced. And so that's just like what I wanted to mention. If we look at the things that kind of looked best on this day, we can just go through it. I think DGXX looked very good, and it followed through spectacularly. EOS looks okay. I think HIMS looks quite good, but the problem is the moving average, but I do think it looks okay. And the question would be like, what is XBI doing on this day? XBI is bouncing, but we just had, I'm trying to hindsight understand. This is obviously biased statement, but I'm trying to understand like, why does HIMS fail when it looks okay? Well, there's a few problems with it. The volume isn't great. If you compare NBIS is a market leader at this point. HIMS is not. So continuation setups, we're a month into a bull run. The things that you wouldn't expect, for example, MSTR to work here because it's had its bounce, right? You're going to get like one really strong bounce out of these things when the market bounces. But expecting a continuation setup on MSTR to work here doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So it's like, you see like these bounces are weak for a reason. They look like DPST here. You see like you get one leg out of the bounce, usually on the things that have sold off the most. And then the things that are like really strong, when they put in a you see like when you get a continuation setup, it should have like multiple legs behind it, all the EMAs stacked and so on. And so there's different contexts for different moves. So if we look at like where we are now, right? We're not in that context anymore, but importantly, I just wanted to talk about those things. Here's another day. We can look at May 11th. This is like well into a bull market. And this is like the first big pullback in a while. So the market context changed. And on a day like the 11th, I would expect the stuff that pulled back the most to be what bounces the hardest. And we can just look what worked over the following days here. We can quickly do that. So over this period, here are the stocks that did the most. These are continuation setups, again, that worked really well. Or none of these pulled back super hard. EOS sure did. That's crazy. But these are continuation setups that worked well here. Cool. Whoa, that's super cool. All right. So I guess what we can learn from this bull market, the best moves start all on the same day. And this is what we can learn is like when the ETF pulls back a lot, maybe more than 8% or something, the things that sold off into the final sell-off bounced the hardest for 2 weeks. Then you had a second leg of bounces that worked. And then when there were continuation setups on the ETFs, both of the ETFs, you got, after 2 of the pullbacks worked, we had 2 legs of pullbacks that bounced. And then we had essentially continuation setups for the rest of the market. That's what it looks like to me. If we look here, based on the premise that we saw on this day, I wouldn't expect bounces to be the primary setup here. It would be leaders on May 20th. So let's study it because I want to see like, yeah, okay. I would expect leaders to have worked here again. Let's see. This is cool. This is the day of the bounce. It works for 3 to 5 days. Sort. Here we are. So if we look, we had ASTI on this day here. So this is what ASTI looked like. Oh, wow. Does it just gap up randomly? That's like a random stock. We had Universal Machines, which had news come out, so that's not fair. We had APPS, so this is an EP, but again, like, that's just lucky. We need moves that like made sense from this day. Space had news. RDW, this is a continuation setup, and this thing worked phenomenally. So you can see it's a continuation setup on the 20th that worked. This one worked too, okay? Coming off of the lows. RGTI off of the lows. But these had news come out, so there's kind of like cheating, right? RCAT, I think, had news come out. MU off of the 20th, not really a good, it's like a bounce, I wouldn't swing that. This had news. SMCI, again, not perfect. Koru, this is like a nice continuation position. And then this is setting up, but it needs to break out within a day, and it does. And that's one of the, so these are continuation setups that work the best. A lot of these things that literally doubled came off of Trump investing a lot. But see, this is a continuations breakout a day after the market did its thing. And you can see in this period, the continuation setups worked best. And so, like, what I do is I generally had a rule, like if you have a breadth thrust here, for example, my rule is to kind of give it 2 days. But what we're seeing here is that on the day that things bounces, you don't want to give it 2 days. Either it bounces on this day or it doesn't. Because if you think about the dynamics of this day, what's going on? There's panic selling, okay? And then in the opening session, some news comes out that changes the whole market. Okay. Whatever panicked the hardest and then got hit by news on this day will be what bounces the best because that's what worked. That's leg one. Leg two, I don't know why. It may just be a coincidence, but it is the things that failed to bounce, like MSTX on this day that did the best. So we have MSTX, we have QBTX, we probably have IONQ. You know, all of these things happen to make huge moves. IONQ ended up having news come out about it, but I just remembered the charts. It's all the quantum stuff that began to bounce here. After all of the bounces have taken place, then the leaders start to take over. And essentially it's non-stop continuation setups all the way, essentially, I would say, to about July 2nd. On July 2nd, the market really did change, in my opinion. And also June, I think the market changed here on kind of this day, June 5th. I did notice that. But if you were trading, I would again bet that it's the momentum leaders that worked on this breakout here if NASDAQ also broke out. And it did. Oh, right. We already looked at this. So I think it's the stuff like BlackBerry that we were. I mean, that's a good continuation setup, but it's extended. I don't know if it'll work. I don't remember. We're looking here on the 11th. It's the stuff like WDC. I think RXT has news come out about it. These become choppier, I would say. I think this is like an okay breakout, and it is like a momentum leader, right? And we know, so on this day, NVIDIA and Amazon invested in the biotech sector. So that's what started this huge move. And this is what mRNA looked like. It ends up being biotech that looks the best. But something like STX looks very good here, except for the fact that it's up multiple legs. ARM, I think ARM is one of the best breakout setups here on this day. And if it's green, it's a breakout set. I don't think this is good. But you can see, I'm pretty sure ARM works really well, right? And so the other thing is, the setups that work for the longest period of time here are essentially the bottom bounce on the semiconductor mean reversion. That's where the long position works. As the market bounces and bounces, the moves become shorter and shorter. So again, QQQ on this day here breaks out. IWM fails to do so. So I don't think it's worth trading. Maybe here, IWM, QQQ. I don't think that's a good breakout. What about this day here? No. Maybe here on the 30th. I could see longing things on the 30th. Let's see what happens. I think it doesn't. Oh, I did long things on the 30th, but it just failed. The thing is, it's best if there's a homogeneous signal, right? IWM doesn't look good here. So if you were forcing a trade, right, you would really want to do only large caps, maybe for 2 or 3 days. And it ended up being only 2 days. But obviously this is a nice setup. But consider IWM didn't participate, Bitcoin didn't participate. So it doesn't really make sense to trade things to the long side there. Now, if we kind of look at what's been happening lately, if you look at IWM, I have been shorting. They've all been working, right? But they've been very short trades that have been working really well lately. And they've been to the short side. And if we look at this, I could see shorting here because it looks like IWM is about to roll over. Do we get NASDAQ confirmation? Yes. And so if I recall, I did something like IONZ on this day. Okay. Yeah, I did. Okay. And then IONZ ended up following through magnificently for 5 days. And so we don't know if things will continue to go short, but the other thing I did was I Let's look at NASDAQ here. On this day here, I shorted things because again, it looks like NASDAQ's rolling over, but you'll see IWM is not. Oh, for heaven's sakes. Oh my God. Give me a sec. And so essentially we have that IWM thing going short. We have, this is just using IWM and NASDAQ to time the market, right? But if you get like a bimodal signal, IWM doesn't really look like it's rolling over, but to me it looks a bit like it's exhausting. You know, at the end of the day, I did take MSTR short on this day here. This is what IWM looked like. You know, it looks like it's exhausting, right, and could fall, but it's nowhere near as clean of a signal as some of these breakouts were. So objectively, I think my trading is worse. That's IWM. Here's NASDAQ, right, literally breaking down. Here's NASDAQ again, and here's IWM. You know, so this is the first day that IWM actually breaks down, I would say. If we look at TZA, very clearly breaking out. If we look at SQQQ, you know, the move started ostensibly on this day here. So what I did was I shorted with MSTZ, and then I took also GDXD. But you can see there's a huge situational awareness component. And yeah. So if we think about like the position that the market's in, because you would expect the things that rallied the hardest, well, I'm applying the opposite framework. I expect things that look like this, the bounces, to work the best here. So we don't have bearish leaders just yet, right? But at this point, the stuff that's going to perform the best kind of looks like this, where it's not extended to the downside for months and months. It's just stuff that rallied that's washing out, in my opinion. And so that's why I did things that are just starting their trend, right? Things like MSTZ are just starting to, I would say it's a bearish leader, actually. Like I noticed, like this doesn't look like a bearish leader here, and it worked the best. MSTZ has not worked the best over this period. So I wonder if MSTZ is a mistake, but I think something like GDXD. So if we think about the same framework, right, like IO and Z coming out of this base worked very well. I think GDXD might work very well. And then if we get into a more extended bearish period, I think things like MSTZ might really wash out if we get like a long-term pullback. So now that we're talking about it, I think that timing may not be amazing, but this is going to be something I'll trade again if we keep pulling back on the markets, essentially. I just wanted to make that in a video and try to get that out there, because I think the way a market starts is you get the bounces like this. You know, you get the bounces from bases, maybe 1, 2, or 3 legs of those bounces from bases, and then you get continuation setups for the duration of the market. And here we're starting to see the things like IO and Z, the QBTZs. These are bounces from bases to the short side. So if these keep working, you're going to start getting bearish continuation setups that work, and then the market, you know, you're going to want to obviously begin to switch your bias pretty quick here. So yeah, I just wanted to make that video. Thanks for watching. Bye.